Okay. Okay. It's been an evening of new experiences. This gentleman was mentioning seeing a ivory woodpecker, which amazed me, but even more amazing is to hear that someone won an argument with their wife. That was, still can't get over that. Yeah. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk about uh, books for bird watchers tonight. Over the course of the work that I do, I connect with a lot of readers and a lot of bird watchers, and most bird watchers are big readers. Uh, I think bird watching and reading has a lot in common. I think whether you are opening your window to spot a blue jay or opening a book to gaze at a new sentence, you're really looking for beauty in either case. And I think beauty is a great uh, moral imperative for beauty, great moral good. It kind of sustains us to do the work of healing and repairing uh, a troubled world. So I'm always happy to talk about bird watching and to talk about reading. Uh, Gave a little thought tonight about what is a bird book, and there are a few different kinds of bird books. Obviously, there's how-to bird books. Uh, there's other bird books that are meant strictly as works of art, like this big coffee table books, and then there's other kinds of bird books that are more about what my friend Christoph Armscher calls the poetics of natural history, which is books that use poetry and essays, even fiction sometimes, to celebrate birds in the natural world. So I thought I would just kind of mix and match and do a sampling of different kinds of bird books. Uh, just want to, on a technical matter, say I'm getting a message your battery is running low. That's not me. Okay. Uh, so I'm going to touch on books from all those categories tonight. I wanted to say this is not a best of list. This is not like the best bird books of all time. I don't think I have the know-how to compile such a list. Uh, this is just a survey of some books that I have read over the years that
Little technical difficulty. We have to reboot the laptop. It lost power. Hang tight, everybody. We're rebooting the laptop.
keep them on the list because maybe you might not have need of them, but maybe they might make good gift ideas for them. So the other thing, before we get into our list tonight, wanted to invite you while we're going over our list, be thinking about bird books that you like, because I always like to learn about books from get book recommendations from other people. So I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion afterwards about that. So
wanted to do the okay. But now that it's up, I can switch it. It was, yeah, it just wasn't giving.
This speaker's view on the Zoom, so we need to switch it to the same thing you're seeing.
Okay.
great.
Okay.
We're good.
And Jane, are you going to be my slide rotator? Are you
No,
gonna-
can you do it from this one?
Right here. Okay.
Those tiny little.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get started. Our first little cat. And by the way, this is going to be speed dating tonight. I don't know if you're familiar with speed dating, but speed dating is whenever you talk to a prospective date for 3 minutes and then you move on. We're going to be covering a lot of titles tonight. We're going to be doing some literary speed dating, so we can kind of get through our list and then have a discussion afterwards. So our first category is books about ornithology. So of course I wanted to start with Peterson's Field Guide, and I know a lot of folks here already have a Peterson's Field Guide. The other question that obviously pops up is, if you have apps on your phone, why would you still need a field guide? I love apps like Merlin. I think they're wonderful. I think they're invaluable. The reason I still keep a field guide on my shelf and I occasionally consult it, I just think it's handy to have all that information in one place. There's also something wonderful and tactile about a book that is great to show younger people. Just to keep it on the coffee table. It's a good conversation starter to get other people who might not be interested in bird watching, perhaps interested in it. I also have a sentimental attachment to the Peterson Field Guide because of a connection this guide has to Louisiana. As most of you know, the Peterson Field Guides were created by a famous ornithologist, Roger Torrey Peterson, and he actually helped popularize bird watching across the country because of these simple, easy to use field guides. And he did all of the art for these field guides. Well, in 1996, Roger Torrey Peterson was working on the very last plate for the 5th edition of the Peterson Field Guides. He was, at the time, he was 87 years old, and there was some doubt about whether he'd be able to finish the book, but he was working on the very last plate of the book. He told his wife, I'm halfway through this plate of, it was accidental flycatchers. That was the plate. And he went and to take a nap, and he never woke up. He died in his sleep. So there was one plate that was unfinished, and the question was, who are we going to get to finish the plate? And so a great deal of thought was given to this. And the decision was made by Mr. Peterson's widow, Virginia, that she would commission an LSU faculty member, H. Douglas Pratt, who was a great, he still is around. He's 80 years old now, but he was on the staff at LSU, commissioned him to finish the plate. So he became the first person at that time, besides Roger Tory Peterson, ever to have a piece of art in a Peterson field guide. A little bit of history there. And when that fifth edition was published, they published a tribute to Mr. Peterson with the unfinished plate, and then they also included the finished plate from H. Douglas Pratt. I think that this should be a housewarming gift. I really do. I think this should be a housewarming gift. Attracting birds to Southern Gardens. Whenever I got my wife and I got our first house, my mother-in-law gave me a copy of this book. I had gotten some nice bird feeders, and what this book, which is, of course, it was written by 3 LSU faculty members. What this book taught me is it's not enough just to have a nice bird feeder and bird seed. You have to create a landscape for birds. And so we've been trying to do that for the past 30 years or so. This book is so well written. The presentation is so easy to understand in terms of the right kinds of shrubs and other plants, native plants to plant to make your bird more attractive. There's also a great tutorial on bird seed, different kind of bird seeds to attract different kind of birds. And I would recommend it as a housewarming gift for people. Anybody who's interested in gardening, I would give that to them, and it's a real treasure. Singing Life of Birds. This morning, I was just so impressed by how loud my yard was. Yeah, because it's a nice warm day. We're getting ready to get into like high season for bird song, bird calls as birds mate. This is a wonderfully written book, and it reminds me that most people who are birders are most of them are a little bit obsessive. And this guy, Donald Kreutzmann, he tells a lot of stories on himself and his obsession to really understand how birdsong works. And he kind of deconstructs various bird songs the same way that like a classical musician might deconstruct a Mozart sonata. I mean, he will do the same thing with like how wrens sing and how robins sing. He will give various charts and graphs, and it's really very interesting. He also mentions that in order to properly record titmice for his scholarship, he thought, they're going to sing most clearly at about roof level at my house. So I'm going to get up with my recording equipment on top of my house. And so he climbed up with his ladder. He tied a rope to himself and then to his ladder to kind of secure himself so he wouldn't slide off of the house. He actually has a picture of himself on the roof. And these are the kind of cautionary examples that, I could show my wife and say, I like birds, but I would never do that. So, I mean, he's a very good writer, and he also has a great sense of humor. And he also knows a heck of a lot about birdsong. This book is not one I'd recommend for the field. And there are copies back there you can check out. This is basically a combination of like a guide to Eastern and Western regions for bird life. It's just the whole thing. It's actually published by the National Audubon Society. It's not going to fit in your jacket. Why do I like it? And some people might say, well, you can get all this information online. Again, I'm a great enthusiast of online and information and apps. I think they're great. Why do I continue to like these books in addition to all the great online resources? You know, it's that old story of Noah and the Ark. It's like, why is that the first story that we tell kids? There's just something about having all of this varied wildlife in one place under one roof that really kind of activates our imagination. And just to flip through this book and see the auks and the penguins and the gulls and the terns and the owls just all in one place, I just find it kind of neat, stimulating, a great thing to have on the coffee table, and again, a great conversation piece. Also, a great way to talk to people who are non-birders and just kind of get them interested in it. So that's why I included that on the list too. David Allen Sibley, some of you might know, is he's a great bird artist. He's also a great scholarship of birds. And here's a great concept, what it's like to be a bird, because I don't know about you, but quite often when I'm having coffee in the morning, I'm on the patio and I'm looking at that cardinal or that wren or that sparrow, I'm wondering what is on their mind. And I don't know if we'll ever completely resolve that mystery of why birds do what they do. But this book, not only is it a beautiful book, but he also has all sorts of really neat facts in the book. Like just flipping through it today, I learned that birds' eyesight is just much, much better typically than humans. They can process images more than twice as quickly as we can. And so if we're looking at a movie, of course, a movie is just a series of still pictures that are strung together to create an image of a moving picture. Well, because birds can process images much more quickly, if they were to look at a movie, they would actually see it as a series of slides, like a slideshow, because they can process images much more quickly than we can. So I guess, you know, is that useful information? It's interesting information, and I guess, you know, what it would tell me is, you know, don't take a hawk to a movie. But you know, I didn't think about that. I've never thought about how would a bird process moving images. There's just page after page after page that kind of takes you into the inner life of a bird. It's just a really neat book. If you want even more scientific detail, then this is a companion volume. I think that is much, the Sibley Guide to Bird Life and Behavior is much more technical than what it's like to be a bird. But if you're into more technical information, that's a great companion volume. So our next category is just books about the joy of birds and nature. Amy Tan, I think maybe some of you might have heard about this book, but yeah, she's a great novelist. She wrote the Joy Luck Club. In 2016, she was kind of feeling down in the dumps. She lives out in California, and she just kind of fell into bird watching. And I think she's might be either near 80 or in her 80s, but it's fairly late life interest in bird watching. And she began taking art lessons to with a local artist to teach herself how to draw birds. So she became a bird watcher and a bird artist in addition to being an accomplished novelist, which is, you know, really that's high achievement. And this is the book that was published last year. And this is a collection of her bird art along with entries from her bird watching journal that she keeps up there in coastal California. It's a reminder, and this word obsessive is gonna recur tonight again as a theme. She mentions keeping large amounts of live mealworms in her refrigerator to feed her birds, something that her husband tolerates. She also talks about how messy the finches are that come to visit, and how she's constantly having to sweep off her patio because the leavings of the seed attract rats. And she's also talks about endless battles with squirrels. You know, as I'm reading it, I'm thinking about this internationally acclaimed novelist out there just reduced to just kind of behavior, you know, just to keep her birds happy. But it's something that anybody who watches birds, I think, can relate to. Stubborn Light of Things is it's a book by a naturalist she's English. She divides her time between London and Suffolk County in England. Melissa Harrison started a podcast during the lockdowns. She just went out with her recording device. She wasn't any expert in this, but she went out into her little village and she started recording the sounds of natural life out there in the village, and just it was a way to bring nature to people who were locked in. And I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but I happen to come across this one, and it is really a magical thing. It's a wonderful thing. If you and it's free, so if you just want to go online and find the Stubborn Light of Things podcast, that's a neat thing. But this book is based on her dispatches from that time, and she's also writes nature columns for the Times of London, and this is a collection of her pieces from that. And she's just a wonderful writer. Interesting fact I learned from the book: 2/3 of the city of London, 2/3 of the city of London is made up of gardens, parks, woods, and water. Never would have thought that, but that's the case. It has the distinction of being one of the greenest big cities on the planet. Don't know how many of you are familiar with Margaret Wrinkle, but she is a New York Times columnist. She writes a weekly column that appears every Monday in the online version of the New York Times. Occasionally, her columns are also in the print edition. She writes from Nashville. She lives in Nashville. She has a half-acre lot in the city of Nashville, and half of her columns are about political matters, but the other half, it kind of alternates. The other half are about just her looking at nature in her backyard in Nashville. The reason I really like her writings is so much nature writing is about, New England, which is great. That's wonderful. But this is like a regional writer. A lot of the things that she writes about in her backyard are very similar to what we might see in Louisiana. And the best of her work has been collected in this collection, A Comfort of Crows, which basically just follows a year in her backyard. And she's a beautiful, observant writer about birds and possums and raccoons. And she's just a beautiful writer. River Walking is by Kathleen Dean Moore. She's a retired philosopher. She was a university professor in Oregon. She lives in Oregon. She writes about nature in the Pacific Northwest, and she is just a very, very beautiful writer, and she's very good with really giving such a concentrated focus on the landscape that it really kind of inspires you to look at your own landscape. So even though a lot of the things that she sees in her landscape are not things we'd see here, it really inspires me to pay more attention to what's in my backyard here in Baton Rouge. So I really love her work. Kind of in the same tradition, and this is a book that I had no idea I would like. How to Catch a Mole. It is by a British writer, Mark Hamer, and it's a little bit of an ironic book because it's really about how not to catch a mole. This gentleman made his living for decades as a professional mole catcher. He would go to, you'd be various, people who ran English estates would just hire him to go get rid of their moles. And he did that for decades. And what he eventually decided is, there's really not that much wrong with moles. I mean, yeah, they make your yard look a little bit less than the textbook ideal of what a yard is supposed to look like, but they help aerate the soil. And they're just really good to have in the local ecology. I mean, ultimately, in the great circle of nature, they help bird life too. So he just decided to give it up. And this is basically his observations of all the things that he's seen, because he has spent most of his life has been spent outdoors, because every day he was out looking at stuff, observing it. And he begins the book. This is kind of a different beginning to a book, but it says, I am a gardener. I've been catching moles in gardens and farms for years. I've decided that I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's the beginning of his book. Why did I find this book? And you will, once you start reading this book, I know it's a cliche, you won't be able to stop reading this book. It's very interesting. It's basically what he invites you to do without preaching. He does not ever preach. He asks you to think about, is there anything in my life that I've just been doing for decades that maybe if I really thought about it, I would say, I don't want to do that anymore. And again, he doesn't preach, but that's kind of the subtext, is he's sort of inviting us to think about that. And he's just a really wise, witty, and wry writer who's had a kind of an interesting life. Don't know how many of y'all are familiar with Cy Montgomery, but she wrote a bestseller called The Soul of an Octopus. And it was about her continued study of this one octopus and how it taught her how intelligent octopuses are, and octopuses. And this is another one of her books. It's called The Hummingbird's Gift. It's small. You could probably read the whole thing easily in an afternoon, probably an hour. And she has lots, and one of the central stories that kind of runs through her little tutorial, which is about hummingbirds. She talks about a wildlife rehabilitation expert who's basically trying to keep alive two baby Allen's hummingbirds who are really hardly bigger than bumblebees. And she talks about how this rehab specialist really has to have a jeweler's eye to try to take care of these birds. And, the fact that she manages to keep them alive is just really kind of a miracle. So again, she's a wonderful writer, and you'll learn a great deal about hummingbirds. Jonathan Rosen, he's also just a great writer, and he writes kind of about the popular kind of culture of bird watching in the United States. And the book also includes a trip here to LSU. He lives in New York City, but the book includes his account of a trip to LSU to see Van Remsen. I don't know how many of you folks know Van, but great ornithologist who lives here. in the Baton Rouge area. He talks about pulling open a case at the Department of Ornithology over at LSU, pulling open a drawer and seeing a line of specimens of dead ivory-wheeled woodpeckers. He describes them as folded up like portable umbrellas. But he makes the case that we need to stop picking on bird watchers as odd ducks. That actually bird watching is really, he makes a very kind of coherent argument that bird watching is really our biggest national pastime when you look at it by the numbers and how much is spent on it, how many people have been interested in it for how many, pretty much since the founding of our country, that it really is our national pastime. So it's a neat book to read. I discovered Gilbert White during the pandemic because saw him mentioned online. He was just a funny old duck. He lived in England during pretty much at the time of the American Revolution. He was an 18th century clergyman. He was deeply unmarried. He was deeply fascinated by nature, so much so that he kept copious notes on just everything he was growing in his garden, all the birds he would see. And he had a restless curiosity. He would do anything to satisfy his curiosity. He, as an example, wondered if bees could hear. So he decided, I'm going to devise an experiment. He got a trumpet. He would go out every morning, go up to the beehive and sound the trumpet and just see if the bees reacted. So he would go out, sound the trumpet, take notes. No, they don't seem to care, and take notes. And this was who he is. And he's just, so this essential Gilbert White, it basically collects a lot of his writings, but primarily his journal entries, which are just really marvelous. And the thing about it is you can just put it by your bedside. You can read a little bit at a time. The entries are very brief. The thing about him is he thought that what was happening outside was news. And when my kids are grown, when they call me and they say, what's going on today? And I say, well, the first goldfinch has arrived. And I know they're talking about me behind my back. And I know they're saying, we need to check on daddy because there's not much going on in his life. He needs to get out more. But the thing about Gilbert White is he kind of validates your sense that these things are important because he thought that was news. And I like old Gilbert, so I try to talk him up wherever I go. The Wise Hours is a book that was published last year by journalist Miriam Darlington, and she just has a wonderful interest in owls. She was at it's basically a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, and she was walking through it, and somebody happened to have an owl that they had brought as a novelty. And she walked right past the owl and didn't see it, and then finally noticed it, kind of got her interest going. It's like, wow, how elusive are these birds that I could walk right past it and not even notice it. And so it kind of led her on this odyssey. She ended up going to many parts of the world to study owls. And this is her kind of survey of owl life. And it's a great read. We all know about Henry David Thoreau writing Walden. He was also a great bird watcher. And this book just basically collects some of his entries on birds, his journal entries on birds, and they have these beautiful pictures by the artist Barry Van Dusen. And again, the thing about this book is you can just dip into it, dip out of it. It's just a great one to have by your couch or by your bedside. Love this book. It's a great conversation starter. It's a great book to have for kids in case they say, why do they call, cardinals cardinals? I think many of us know why cardinals are called cardinals. But there's a lot of neat things in here. Just flipping through it today. Never thought about this. Why are they called crowbars? Uh, Crowbars are called crowbars because crows have these curved beaks, and the curve of their beaks allows them to have extra leverage, and they have very strong curved beaks. And so these tools are named after the crow's beak, and of course, crow's feet. It's because of the little prints that crows make in the snow that kind of simulate our eyes. But this book just has like 1,000 little factoids like that are just neat to read about. This is one I always throw in just to see if people are still awake because it's just so strange. Pasta for Nightingales. This is based on some scholar happened to come across this 17th century manual written by an Italian nobleman and brought it out. He just talks about his observations of birds. He also, being Italian, thinks that pasta is a great bird food for nightingales, and he actually includes a recipe for this particular kind of pasta. Is this a must read? No, it's not. But I just threw it in. I throw it in there as a novelty because I just think it's funny. It's also a beautiful book. I wouldn't necessarily buy it, but I would check it out from the library. But it's a neat little entertainment. Leonard Nathan is a poet. He lives in California, and he really kind of gets at kind of the oddity of being so interested in birds. He opens the book by talking. He writes about his various misadventures in bird watching, and he opens the book. He and his friends are looking for a yellow rail, and it's getting dark. They're up to their calves in a California marsh. It's cold, and he asks aloud, "Is it any wonder that people regard bird watchers as a little bit mad?" Is what he says. And I had to laugh whenever I heard that. He also he has this funny kind of ongoing concept. He says, "I have my own ornithologist," in the same way people have their own cardiologist or they have their own therapist. He has his own ornithologist as a friend of his, and he refers to it as, "My ornithologist told me this," or "My ornithologist told me that." And he kind of argues that everybody, for their mental health, should kind of have their own ornithologist. This is a former stand-up comic, wrote a book about bird watching. Again, a lot of humor in it. I like to throw these books in because sometimes people think of bird watching and nature watching as kind of a solemn thing. This guy has a sense of humor. He writes, just as an example, birders often see their life lists as testament to their intellectual abilities, much like a diploma on the wall or a copy of Finnegan's Wake left conspicuously on the coffee table. So kind of talks about how bird watchers can kind of be show-offs. And it's a neat little book. Priyanka Kumar is a filmmaker, and she just really knows how to dramatize what she sees out in the wild. She grew up in the Himalayas. She moved to the United States. She has a lot of beautiful sentences in this book about her experiences watching birds, and this is my favorite line from the whole book. She says, "The seeds of transformation lie dormant in all of our hearts. Sometimes it just takes the right bird to awaken it." I think that's a nice line. So, Spark Birds this is an anthology published by Orion Magazine. It collects a lot of great essays and poems about birds. It's a great thing to have on your nightstand. It's also a nice gift for people that are bird watchers. There's a poem in here that kind of has a nice Louisiana feel to it. It's called Afternoon with Brown Pelicans by Jean Monahan. And she writes about watching these brown pelicans. They're present one moment and then they're not, because they fly off, just like most birds that we watch in the wild. They're here and then they're not. And she concludes the poem by saying, everything we have is borrowed. And I think that's such a neat thing and such a reminder to me of why bird watching is so magical, because it reminds you that everything's transient. And because it is transient is what makes it so beautiful. This is a tiny little volume. It's a collection of poems about birds. And it's a great stocking stuffer for Christmas. I know Christmas has passed, but see how small it is. And so if you know somebody that you have a friend that's a bird watcher, great little thing to slip and just a small present, slip in the stocking. Has a lot of neat little poems in there about birds. One of them is, here's one by Anthony Heck. This is the only poem I've ever read about house sparrows. People write about great poems about eagles and cardinals but house sparrows are kind of neglected. Little poem about sparrows. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says their color is the elderly moleskin gray of doggedness, of mist, magnolia bark, salt of the earth they are, the common clay. So he kind of puts in a good word for just birds that don't look striking, but they still get out there and they do the job. So it's a neat little book. These are just big books of bird art. These are two new books that came out last year. The Art of the Bird. I think there might be a copy back there. Even for a coffee table book, this is just a huge book. Again, these are expensive books, but kind of nice. Just kind of nice to have on the coffee table as conversation starters. Same way with Bird, Exploring the Winged World. It's another huge. It came out last year during the holiday season. I'm going to throw in a few books about John James Audubon since he has such a deep Louisiana connection. Not a lot of people know that Audubon was a great writer in addition to being a great bird artist. He just wrote a lot of, he was a very vivid and dramatic writer. This volume collects a lot of his writings about birds, including many from Louisiana. I always encourage people to Audubon's Birds of America. Everybody knows it's a huge volume. This is one of mine. As they were originally produced, they're 2 feet, I think 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. I think this is a little bit smaller. You can get any number of editions of the book. What I always encourage people to do, if you haven't done it, LSU Hill Memorial has they have Audubon Day. It's typically every April, and you can sign up and you can go in and you can actually look at their original copy of the Birds of America. And the first time I was told about this, I thought, well, who's going to show up on a Saturday morning and sign up and you go in 15-minute segments and they turn the page and you can see it. I just wondered how many people would show up for such a thing. Some folks had driven all night from, I think, Tennessee to come. I mean, this typically happens. I mean, people have come from Wall Street Journal, sent a journalist from New Orleans, from New York to write about Audubon Day because, I mean, it is a singular thing to see these pictures in their original form because the colors are so vivid, and whenever they're reproduced in various, modern editions, you tend to lose a lot of the color, but they're just really vivid things to see.
They changed the date this year to the first weekend in May. So, be sure to check that out.
It's really neat. I mean, there's a lot of great conversation, a lot of people from all walks of life. They just kind of gather around a table like magi around a crush, and they're just kind of looking as people turn pages, and uh, so it's a neat thing. There's a French artist, Denis Clavrel. He went and he retraced Audubon's footsteps in the United States. He spent a lot of, and in the course of retracing his footsteps, he went through Louisiana, spent some time in St. Francisville, and he wrote this book in which he does his own pictures of the birds as they appear now in Louisiana. And this book came out, I think, in 2023. And it's a beautiful book. And he's also a good writer. By the way, we might not be familiar with Claverel's work here, but in France, he's quite celebrated. He's done numerous, I think, postage stamps for the French government. I mean, he's considered kind of a big deal in France, and he's done this book, and and as I said, a lot of the art that he did in the book is actually from here in Louisiana. Ben Faulkner lives in France now. He's lived in France for a number of years, but he was a longtime resident of Louisiana, and he is an Audubon scholar, and he compiled all of many of Audubon's writings about Louisiana into one book, and this is that book, and that's Audubon on Louisiana, another great resource if you're interested in Audubon. This book came out just a couple of months ago. It is The Birds That Audubon Missed. You know, Audubon couldn't possibly get to all the birds that he wanted to get to. So Ken Kaufman is a contemporary bird artist. He again went back through many of the places that Audubon visited, and he tried to paint pictures of the birds that Audubon missed. And Ken Kaufman, part of the argument he makes is that Audubon was a singularly gifted artist, and he shows you his attempts, Ken Kaufman's attempts, to actually paint birds in an Audubon style. And of course, they don't look nearly like as compelling as Audubon's work. And that's kind of one of the points that he makes, is that Audubon was a singularly gifted artist. Another book that came out just last year, Audubon as Artist, is by Roberta Olson. She was a longtime curator of all of Audubon's the Birds of America paintings that are at the New York Historical Society in Manhattan. She's probably the best Audubon scholar in the United States. She is retired from that position now. In this book, she kind of shows you how Audubon came to develop the style that he developed. And one of the arguments she makes is that he really was very much grounded in European Romanticism, which is why his paintings have this great sense of theater. And it's a beautiful, well illustrated book that kind of tells you a lot about how he came to be the artist that he became. Alexander Wilson, not many people talk about Alexander Wilson. He was kind of a rival to John James Audubon, and he died early. He knew Audubon, Audubon knew him. They were both kind of in a race to make the definitive pictorial survey of American bird art, and then Alexander Wilson died. Don't think his technique was nearly as good as Audubon's. Perhaps it would have developed, and maybe we might, be be calling ourselves the Alexander Wilson Society instead of the Audubon Society. But this is really he was Scottish, and he moved to America to study American birds. And this is really a great biography of him. Kind of takes you into an often unexplored corner of American ornithology. I wrote a little book about Audubon's time in Louisiana. This is not for me to talk about myself, but I just wanted to end on that on this book because really I wanted to underline how important Audubon's connection was to Louisiana. He did more bird pictures here than on any other place on the planet. And he said of all the places that he had visited, that Louisiana was his favorite spot in the Union. And this is really where he developed the technique that kind of came to identify him as John James Audubon. So whether you read my book or whether you read other books, I do think it's important to kind of celebrate that legacy. So, and with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and also ask anybody here if you have a bird book that you like, that you'd like to suggest.
Unshares Williamson.
You want me to stop sharing? Oh, okay, so you can say.
So this
Yeah.
is about, but I mean, it's about birds, but it's not like an idea. I like feather thing. That's
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about. I haven't read the feather. Tell me about the feather thief.
Required reading for every birder.
Okay. Tell me about the feather thief.
wants a brand new flute.
Okay.
So he decides that he's going to recreate original fishing boards for fly fishing using birds that are in a museum. So he goes into the museum, steals the birds, like from Darwin's time, and takes them and dismantles them and makes these flies and sells them. And then he gets off because he says, "Oh, I had aspirin." That's what I did.
Okay.
So-
The feather thief.
So
Okay.
the
Because there's a
story-
book called The Falcon Thief.
So the feather thief, it describes this heist.
Mhm.
So this young man breaks into the British Museum, steals 400 skins, tears them apart
Wow.
to sell the individual feathers. He does get caught, and so it tells the whole story of that. But the author weaves in the story of the feather trade in the late 18th century, 19th century, early 20th century, and talks about why why people were stealing these skins, not only for flies, but also for using for ladies' hats. So he talks about the feather trade and millinery and
Wow.
the law that eventually was passed that protects birds today. So it's a wonderful story. And it really is. I tell all my bird watching classes that this is required reading. Every one of you need to know because at some point somebody's going to have a feather and they need to understand why it's not okay to take that feather home. And so it gives the backstory.
Okay, there you go.
They've now taken the data that they could have gotten from those skins, like what was in the environment at that time.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now I have homework. Yeah.
Making of John James, who's my voice, the making of John James Audubon by Richard Rhodes. It's an Audubon.
Yes.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
I should have mentioned his book. I think that book is the best Audubon biography because it's very balanced. It gives you the good, the bad, the whole thing. And
Repeat the name of it for the people at home.
John James Audubon, The Making of an American by Richard Rhodes, and it's Rhodes. And whenever we did the little documentary version of my book, Dick Rhodes very kindly came from California to be in the filming, and he was one of our commentators for the documentary. He's great. Yeah. Yes, sir.
One of my all-time favorite, Ken Kaufman's early book, Kingbird Highway.
Oh, yeah.
A death man.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a gifted artist and gifted writer. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Question is inspired by one of the books that you talked about.
Sure.
Anybody ever caught a mole? I have. They bite.
They bite, yeah.
You know, well, in How to Catch a Mole, Mark Hamer, the author, he mentions that moles have enormously powerful arms because of the digging that they do. And he says that even if you're a strong person, it's virtually impossible to hold a mole in your hand and keep your fist closed because they will press it out. They have very strong arms.
When you
Because-
say after the teeth.
I don't remember him mentioning that, but yeah. Wow.
One of the books that I read recently is called Birding to Change the World. I don't have to look up the author. But this woman did not start out to be a birder. She basically fell into it, and it tells about her life as a journalist, as a therapist, and other things, eventually a professor. But she talks about moving to Louisiana to take a job at Tulane in July of 2005. And as I was reading it, and I hit that date, I thought, oh, bad. And it was bad. It triggered me more than I ever thought that it would, because of the references to Katrina and the fact that, you know, her house was 11 feet underwater. And but it's a really good book, and I that is one I recommend also.
Great.
I have a favorite author, Jennifer Ackerman. She's written The Genius of Birds, The Bird Way, What an Owl Knows. It's just
Yeah.
wonderful information. She takes all this scientific information and like puts it, you know, almost like a prose in many ways.
Yeah.
It reads like a novel, and you get all this wealth of information of what birds are doing, how they're doing it.
She's a wonderfully descriptive writer, and she's another one that we could have mentioned tonight. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned Jennifer Ack.
I got one more that I read recently. It's called 10 Birds That Changed the World by Stephen Moss.
Well,
And
tell me, how was that?
it's fantastic.
Huh.
I mean, I don't remember all the details
Sure,
of each one, but the one that does resonate with me is the snowy egret,
Mhm.
and how that the British Royal Society was created because of that bird.
Oh, wow.
And the movement, and it was a movement of women that changed the art of making hats out of those bird feathers to resist that. So, and they created that Royal Society to become more engaged in understanding of birds and nature, help change the laws in the United States as well as in Great Britain. It's fascinating, and you know,
Wow.
women led that effort.
And that's where the Audubon Society came from too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Wow.
it's a great read. I mean, each one of these birds has so much information like that, you know. Yeah.
That's great.
Great read.
You have to wonder what birds did you know, but that were popular and brought over.
So in the book I mentioned, 100 Birds and How They Got Their Names, there's a little aside that mentions there's a legend that magpies were the only creatures who refused to get on the ark because inside, because they wanted to stay on the top and chatter because the conversation was better on top of the ark or something like that. There's some kind of silly tale, but I mean, it's meant to illustrate, that magpies, love to chatter, but I thought that was funny. Yeah.
Question for you.
Yes, sir.
Most birders have a trigger bird that feeds the obsession. In the beginning, you have a trigger bird?
Like my spark bird or trigger bird. Yeah, okay,
yeah,
whatever.
spark bird.
Yeah, sure.
Trigger bird is another name for it.
Well, I was telling someone earlier that, the short answer is that it was a cardinal, actually. And I know, I was not interested in birds until I got married. And my wife and I, at the ceremony, this is in 1994, at the ceremony, instead of throwing rice, we threw birdseed, and there was some left over. My wife and I got a stomach virus on our wedding night, and we had to postpone our honeymoon. We went and we spent our first week convalescing from the stomach flu. And my mother-in-law had brought home, but had left at our doorstep the leftover birdseed. And I thought, why, I wondered why she had done that, because I wasn't going to use it. What would I do with birdseed? And just to get it out of the house, I just threw it out in the courtyard. I just threw it out in the courtyard. And as I was bored and looking out the window, cardinal came by, and then another cardinal. And I thought, that's kind of neat. That cardinal wasn't there before, and now it is because of something that I did. And it was sort of like I had begun a conversation with a bird. And from that, I decided I'm going to buy some more birdseed. And that's how I became a bird watcher. And I'm not a great bird watcher. I'm probably the least accomplished bird watcher in this room, but that's how I became interested in birds, just by cardinal landing in my courtyard. How about you? Yeah, what started?
Painted bunny and cheerleader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Wow. Those are,
Only dancing not accomplished, but he is a regular contributor to the
yeah,
Baton Rouge Christopher.
yeah. The birds that kind of, whenever the year is at its absolute bottom and kind of pull me, it's when the first goldfinch arrives, in the winter. That's just a special time for me. But well, thank you. This has been a great pleasure to share fellowship with you and talk about books and talk about birds.
We all have a lot to read.
Yeah. Thanks. Sure. And is the list in the back? Is there a list in the back? I mean, the list of books. I think maybe the library printed it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like people had some printouts. Yeah.
And I don't know if it's online. But thank you. Sure. Thank you.
And we usually post this on YouTube, so
Okay.
people can see it again. Everybody here.
Great.
The regular, so they know.
Great.
We'll let.
We are gonna, thank you guys. I'm gonna close down the Zoom portion. But I'm glad everyone joined.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Hold on. So she was out of town. She says, thank you. Good night, everybody.
This is